The rain fell like static over Shinjuku, blurring the neon into rivers of red and gold, and 9 floors beneath all that light, in a room that appeared on no city map, Mai Sorano learned exactly how quiet a place could get right before something terrible happened. She stood at the edge of the private gaming floor, with a tray of untouched drinks balanced against her ribs, and beneath the black silk of her uniform, taped just below her heart, a wire recorded everything. The casino breathed around her, the soft click of chips, the hush of felt, low music that never quite resolved into a melody. Men in tailored suits leaned over the baccarat table, as if it were an altar, and none of them looked at the waitress. That was the point. That was the entire design of her. She lifted her chin, turned toward the mirrored column beside the bar, and under her breath, in a language almost no one living still spoke, she whispered, "Target present, north table. 3 guards, 2 doors. He has not moved in 40 minutes. The words came out in the old tongue of Shiokawa, the Tide speech, of a fishing village, clinging to a coast most maps had long forgotten. A dialect worn so thin by time that even in her childhood, only the oldest women still used it fluently. Her grandmother's language, a dead language her handlers liked to call it, which was exactly why the Bureau valued her so much. No one could parse a wire she narrated in a tongue that had no dictionary, no software, no living speaker outside a scatter of graves on a windswept hill. When Mai whispered in the Tide speech, she was invisible. She had built her entire quiet life on that invisibility. Then the room changed temperature. 2 men crossed the floor fast, and a third was dragged between them, his heels skidding across the marble. He was sobbing something about time, about needing more time, and no one at the tables looked up, because everyone at the tables already knew the rule. You did not look. A pistol appeared matte and unhurried, and pressed up beneath the sobbing man's jaw. Mai's breath stopped in her throat. She had been trained for this, briefed for this, and none of the training reached her hands, which had gone cold around the tray. Then a voice, calm and low, carrying across the room without ever rising, cut through all of it. Not here. The man who spoke did not look like the most dangerous person in the building. That was the first lie of him. He sat alone at the far end of the room in a dark chair, a glass of water at his elbow. His sleeves folded back to the forearm, and when he lifted 2 fingers, the pistol withdrew as though it had never existed. Ren Takeda. She knew the face from 100 grainy surveillance photographs. In person he was worse, because in person he was still. Stillness like deep water, the kind that drowns you before you ever feel it move. He turned his head, and across the length of that impossible room, he looked directly at the waitress no one was supposed to see. Mai dropped her eyes to the tray. Steady. Invisible. She breathed once slow and let the old words fall from her lips, barely a movement of air. A prayer aimed at the mirror. Do not look at me. Please do not look at me. And Ren Takeda answered her. Not in Japanese, not in English. In the Tide speech of Shiokawa, in the language of the windswept hill and the scattered graves in her grandmother's dying tongue, he said quietly enough that only she could hear it. Then stop whispering, little Tide. I hear every word. The tray did not fall, though. Afterward, she could never explain how. The world narrowed to a single needle point. Every assumption her life had been built upon, that the language was hers alone, that the wire was safe, that she was a ghost drifting through other people's danger, cracked straight down the middle in one sentence. Then he looked away as if nothing at all had happened, and lifted his glass of water, and left her standing in the wreckage of her own certainty. She did not report the sentence. That was the first crack in her loyalty, though she told herself it was only tradecraft. You did not spook a source. You did not detonate an entire operation on your first night inside. But the truth she carried up the service elevator and out into the drowning neon was simpler and far more frightening. If she reported that Ren Takeda spoke the Tide speech, they would pull her out. And she could not yet say why the thought of never seeing him again landed in her chest like a swallowed stone. Her supervisor was waiting 3 blocks away in a surveillance van tucked behind a shuttered noodle shop, the windows sweating with the heat of too many screens. Special Agent Marcus Halloran had a silver head of hair and a father's easy smile, and a voice like a warm hand on your shoulder, and he had personally requested Mai for this assignment. personally promised her it would be the one that turned her contract into a badge. "Talk to me," he said, not turning from the monitors. "He is careful," Mai said. Her own voice sounded far away to her. "Private floor runs on cash and trust. I will need weeks." "We do not have weeks." Halloran finally looked at her, and his smile did not reach the tired calculation behind his eyes. "There is pressure from above. They want Takeda's ledger, and they want it before the Kuroda Syndicate moves on his territory. You get us inside that back room, Mai, and you write your own ticket." She nodded. She did not mention the language. She told herself she would tomorrow, when her hands had stopped shaking. She did not know yet that tomorrow was a country she would never quite reach. For a full week nothing happened, and the nothing was its own kind of terror. Ren Takeda did not speak to her again. He watched her, though, the way a man watches a door he is not sure is locked. She felt it across the gaming floor like a change in air pressure. When she carried drinks to his table, he studied her hands, her posture, the small hesitations she thought she had trained out of herself. And she understood with a cold clarity that he was not charmed by her. He was suspicious of her. He was measuring the shape of the thing that had walked into his house, speaking a language from the far side of his own childhood. And he had not decided yet whether she was a coincidence or a knife. He tested her. He let a folder of numbers sit open on his table, while he stepped away close enough that a real spy would have leaned in. Mai cleared his glass, kept her eyes on her tray, and did not so much as glance down. When he returned, something in the set of his shoulders eased, and something else in it sharpened. A trap she had passed only made the next trap more careful. Twice more that week he spoke the tide speech to her. Always when no one else could hear. Always cold. Once, as she set down his water, he murmured, "Who sent you, little tide?" And she answered, "Nothing," kept her face smooth as a stone, and felt his gaze follow her all the way to the doors. Another night, he said so softly it might have been the ventilation, "Whatever they promised you, it is not worth your bones." She lay awake until dawn, taking that sentence apart, and could not decide if it was a threat or a warning, and slowly, dangerously, she began to suspect it was neither. It was fear. His. Then, without a word of explanation, he moved her closer. One evening the floor manager pulled her aside and told her with a nervousness that told her the order had come from very high up that she would no longer work the general room. From now on she served the private table alone. Ren Takeda's table. No other staff would approach it. The manager said it the way a man reports a decision he does not understand and is too afraid to question. And Mai understood that she had just been drawn deliberately into the smallest, most watched circle in the building, close enough to touch the ledger the bureau had sent her to find, and close enough for the man himself to watch her every breath. She could not tell whether she had been trusted or trapped. She suspected correctly that Ren had not decided either. The nights that followed were the strangest of her life. She would set his single glass of water at his elbow and stand at the edge of the lamplight while power flowed through that table like current through a wire, men bowing over debts and territories and lives, and through all of it, Ren would say nothing to her and see everything about her. Once, when a name came up at the table that she recognized from a briefing, she felt her pulse jump only a flicker, only a tightening at the corner of her eye, and without looking at her, without pausing the low conversation he was already having, he set 2 fingers flat on the table in her direction. A small motion, steady. It said plainly in a language older than any tongue, "Careful." He had felt her pulse change from across the room. She stopped believing that night that she would ever be invisible to him again. The danger, when it came, did not come from him. A man from the Kuroda Syndicate came up to the private floor one rainy night to negotiate. And he was the kind of man who mistook cruelty for strength. He did not like being made to wait. He liked even less the quiet, and to fill it, he reached out as Mai passed and closed his hand hard around her wrist, hard enough to bruise, and pulled her toward him with a grin, and asked Ren in a lazy voice whether the waitress came with the house. The room went cold. Ren did not stand quickly. That was the terror of him. He rose the way a tide rises, unhurried and absolute, and crossed the floor and took the Kuroda man's wrist in one hand, and Mai heard something small give way inside the grip that had been holding her, and the grinning man was suddenly on his knees, making a sound with no words in it. Ren leaned down, and when he spoke, his voice had not risen at all, which was worse than any shout. "She is not the house," he said. "She is not anything of yours to name. You will apologize to her, and then you will leave my city, and you will thank the sea that I let you keep the hand." The apology came fast and broken. The man left, and Ren, for one unguarded instant, turned to look at Mai, and the ice in him had cracked wide open, and behind it she saw the thing he had been fighting for weeks, and it was not suspicion at all. He had shown his whole hand for her in front of his enemies, and they both knew it, and neither of them could take it back. He recovered in a breath and closed like a door. "Sit down," he said roughly. "You are white as salt." And when she sat, he did something that undid her more completely than the violence had. He picked up his own untouched glass of water and set it in front of her, and turned away so he would not have to watch her drink it, so it would mean nothing, so it could be denied. He walked her to the service door himself that night, which he had never done, and when she stepped out into the alley, the rain was coming down in sheets, and a black car sat idling at the mouth of it, with its lights off. She turned to say something, she never knew what, and found he had already stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, watching her go, the way he must have watched her go 100 times through a wire he was not supposed to have. He did not offer the car. He did not offer his coat. He only stood in the light of the doorway with the rain between them, and said in the Tide speech so low it nearly drowned in the storm, "Get home safe, little Tide," and let her walk away into the dark alone, because wanting to follow her was exactly the thing he had decided he was not allowed to do. She lay awake again that night, and this time she did not take his words apart. This time she simply held them, and was ashamed of how warm they kept her, and understood that she was in a great deal more danger than her handlers had ever prepared her for, because the danger was no longer to her life. Then the traps started failing, and they were not hers. The Bureau ran a controlled buy through a compromised courier, a clean sting that should have put a marked stack of money into Takeda's supply line and a recorder into the heart of it. The courier never arrived. He simply evaporated between the train and the club, and when the task force scrambled to find him, he turned up 2 days later in Osaka, terrified, unharmed, and utterly unwilling to say why he had run. A second operation, a wired informant meant to walk straight up to Ren's second-in-command, collapsed just as cleanly. The informant got cold feet at the door, or so he claimed, though the sweat on him told a different story. The story of a man who had been quietly told somewhere in the dark that the people he was working for could not keep him alive. Halloran raged in the van, blamed leaks, blamed sloppiness, blamed everyone but the smiling man in the mirror. Mai watched him, and felt the first thin thread of a suspicion she did not yet have the courage to name. Because the operations that failed were the ones designed to end with her closer to danger. And the failures had the strange surgical mercy of a hand reaching in to pull a child back from a stove. Someone was disarming the traps around her, someone who always seemed to know where they were laid. She told herself it was paranoia. Then, one rainy Tuesday, she was reviewing intercepts alone in the task force safe house, a dim room lined with monitors, headphones clamped over her ears, transcribing a flagged wire and a file auto-loaded that she had never queues. At first, there was only breath. Then a voice, she knew now the way she knew her own pulse, low and unhurried, spoke into her ears in the Tide speech of Shiakawa. "Little Tide, the men outside your building tonight are not mine. Do not go home. Do you hear me? Do not go home." The color drained from her face. Her hands went numb against the desk. And in the black glass of the dead monitor in front of her, past her own reflection, she saw a second shape. A man's shape, standing directly behind her. She spun chair shrieking against the floor. Ren Takeda stood in the doorway of a room that did not officially exist in a building that should have taken a warrant and a small army to enter. Water darkening the shoulders of his coat, having walked through every layer of her agency's security as if it were paper. He looked at her the way the tide looks at the shore, like something that has been coming toward her a very long time. "You do not listen," he said quietly in her grandmother's tongue. "How are you here?" she breathed. She was on her feet. She did not remember standing. How do you know this language? Who are you? For one moment, something in his face opened, and she saw down through the deep water to whatever lived at the bottom of him, and it was not what she expected. It was not hunger. It was grief. Then it closed. "There is a car across the river with 2 men in it," he said. "In an hour they will come up to your apartment to make it look like you took your own life. There is a note already written. It confesses that you have been selling this task force to the Kuroda for money." He stepped closer, and she did not step back, and neither of them seemed to breathe. "Someone inside your own house is building a grave with your name on it, little Tide. I have been kicking dirt back out of it for 2 weeks, but I cannot dig forever." "Why?" she said. "Why would you protect me? You do not know me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "Run tonight," he said instead, and his voice had gone flat and cold as a shut door. "Leave the city. Leave the country. Do not come back and do not make me watch what they will do to you." He turned to go, and every rule she had ever been given screamed at her to let him. "Say my name," she said. He stopped in the doorway. She saw his hand tighten on the frame. "Everyone in this operation calls me the asset," she said in the Tide speech, now her own dead language trembling in her mouth. "The linguist, the contractor, not one of them has ever said my name. But you knew it before you ever saw my face. Say it." He did not turn around. "Mai," he said. And the way he said it, low and worn smooth, like a stone carried in a pocket for years, told her everything and nothing. "Go home and pack. Then do not go home again." And he was gone into the rain, and she stood alone in the dark room full of screens, shaking with an hour to decide whether to trust the most dangerous man in Tokyo over the agency that signed her checks. She did not run. She was not ready yet to throw away everything she had built on the word of a criminal, no matter how the word had been spoken. But she did not go home either. She checked into a business hotel under a name that was not on any form she had ever signed, sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off and waited to see whether the man in the coat had told her the truth. At 2:15 in the morning, her secure phone lit the ceiling. There had been an incident, the message said, at her apartment. Neighbors had reported men on the stairs. When building security arrived, 2 individuals had fled. A note had been recovered on her kitchen table, unsigned, typed. And Special Agent Halloran wanted to know, very urgently, where she was. Mai sat in the dark and did not answer, and understood that a grave really had been dug for her, and that a dead man's language had been the only shovel keeping it from being filled. Everything after that moved too fast to stop. The task force had a raid scheduled for the end of the week, the operation Halloran had been building toward from the first night a coordinated strike on a Takeda money house in the industrial ring east of the river. Mai had helped write the timing off the intercepts she had transcribed. Now leaderless and hunted, she watched from the outside as it went forward without her, and she knew with the sick certainty of someone reading her own obituary early that it was going to fail. It failed worse than she imagined. The strike team went through the doors on schedule and walked into a room that had been waiting for them. It was not Takeda's men who were waiting. It was the Kuroda. Someone had sold the plan, the timing, the entry points, the fallback, and the buyers had used it to erase a rival and a task force in a single night. The gunfire, when it came, was on every scanner in the city. By dawn, 3 federal agents were dead, in a warehouse that smelled of oil and rain, and the surviving leadership needed a name to hang it on before the sun finished rising. They already had one. The leaked intelligence, when the internal team reconstructed it, had passed through a channel encrypted in a rare dialect, a language with no dictionary, and exactly 1 contracted speaker on the payroll. There were transcripts in Mai's own hand. There were access logs with her credentials. There was a confession note recovered from her kitchen. There was a witness, a smiling, silver-haired supervisor who stood in front of the review board with grief in his eyes and said that he had trusted her, that he had championed her, that it broke his heart, and that all the evidence pointed one terrible direction. Mai became the most wanted person in the operation before she had finished understanding that the operation was over, so she ran. And there was only one direction left to run. He came for her himself. No soldiers, no convoy. A single dark car idling at the mouth of an alley in the gray hour before morning. The passenger door already open, and Ren Takeda behind the wheel, with the stillness of a man who had known she would come, the way you know the tide will come. She got in. She hated that getting in felt like the first safe thing she had done in weeks. He drove out of the city and kept driving north and then west until the neon fell away behind them, and the roads narrowed and the land began to remember what it had been before anyone paved it. Rain streaked the windows. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "They think I did it," she finally said. "They think I sold those men." "I know. You could have let them." His hands did not move on the wheel. "No," he said. "I could not." The house he took her to stood alone at the end of a headland, where the road simply stopped, an old wooden place hunched against the wind above a black and heaving sea, and Mai knew it in her body before her mind caught up. She knew the shape of that coast. She knew the smell of that particular salt. She had not stood on this shore since she was a child, and yet every cell of her recognized it. This was Shiokawa. He had brought her home. "Why here?" she whispered. "Because no one from your world will ever think to look for you in a place they have already declared dead." He killed the engine. The sea filled the silence. "And because I owe you the truth, and this is the only place I have ever been able to tell it." Inside, he lit a lamp against the storm, and in its light, she saw the room, and the room stopped her heart. One wall was covered floor to ceiling in her. Not photographs of her face at first, though those were there too, a handful, grainy, taken at a distance across airports and street corners. It was her voice that filled the wall. Transcripts, reels of tape in careful boxes, each labeled by date, going back years, longer than she had held her contract, longer than she had spoken the Tide speech into any wire. Pages and pages, in 2 columns, her words on one side and their meaning on the other, annotated in a patient hand that had clearly loved the work of understanding her. A map with a single village circled, and pinned at the center of all of it, yellowed and soft with handling, a child's photograph of 2 children on a windswept hill, a small, solemn girl, and 3 steps behind her a boy who was watching her instead of the camera. "I grew up 3 houses down the hill from your grandmother," Ren said behind her very quietly, in the Tide speech the only language that had ever fit around this. "You would not remember me. I was older and I left when the boat stopped paying the way everyone left until the village was only old women and graves. But I remembered you. The girl who still spoke the old words when no one her age would. The last young voice of a language that was dying." Mai could not turn around. Her hand had risen to the wall without her permission and rested against the boxes of her own recorded breath. "Years later I heard that voice again," he went on. "On an intercepted line in a city 1,000 kilometers from that hill, speaking my mother's tongue into the dark, thinking no one alive could understand. I told myself I listened because it was useful. A federal linguist, a channel into my enemies. That was the lie I lived inside for a long time, but that is not why I could not stop." His voice roughened. "You would whisper things into those wires that you thought no living soul would ever hear. Not the intelligence, the rest. On the bad nights you would say you were tired of being invisible. You would say you were afraid no one would ever know your real name. You said it in the one language I could understand, and no one else could, and you said it to no one, and I was the no one who heard all of it. I fell in love with a voice in the dark, my years before you ever set foot in my house. I knew you before you knew I existed. That is the shape of the thing I have done to you, and I will not pretend it is a smaller or cleaner thing than it is." Mai finally turned around. She should have been afraid. Every training she had ever received told her that a man who had recorded years of her private voice, who had built a shrine to a woman he had never spoken to, was the most dangerous kind of obsession wearing a human face. And she was afraid a little the way you are afraid standing at the edge of something very deep. But under the fear was a feeling she had no defense against at all, because it was the feeling she had confessed into all those wires on all those bad nights. To be known. To be, for once in her invisible life, not a ghost. He had heard every word she had ever thrown away into the dark, and instead of using them against her, he had spent 2 weeks bleeding his own power dry to keep her alive. "The traps," she said. "It was you. All of them. Every one that would have ended with you in a body bag or a cell." His jaw tightened. "I let your people believe I was lucky. I let my own people believe I was ruthless. I fed your operation false timings and let the small things through so no one would look too closely. at why the dangerous things always missed you. I have not been fighting your task force, Mai. I have been fighting one man inside it. The one who chose you from the very first night precisely because you were disposable. A contractor. A woman who spoke a language no one could audit, so that whatever they pinned on you could never be checked by anyone but you, and you would not be alive to check it. The floor seemed to tilt. She thought of a silver head of hair and a father's easy smile, and a voice like a warm hand on the shoulder. She thought of the word he had used on the first night. Disposable. He had never said it. He had only made her feel it, over and over, until she was grateful for the chance to be used. Halloran, she said. The name came out of her like something torn. Marcus Halloran has been selling your task force to the Kuroda for 3 years, Ren said. Names of informants, timings of raids. He sold the men who died in that warehouse. And when the losses grew large enough that even his own review board would eventually go looking for the leak, he needed a name that was not his to hand them. He chose yours before you ever walked into my house. You were never sent to catch me, little Tide. You were sent to be caught. Then why keep your distance, she whispered. If you knew, if you loved me, why let me stand in the fire at all? You could have taken me out of it weeks ago. Because a woman who simply vanishes looks guilty forever, he said. You told me once into a wire on a bad night that the worst thing was that no one would ever know your real name. If I hid you, you would spend the rest of your life as the traitor who ran. The only way to give you your name back was to let the trap close all the way, with the right man's hand still on it. I kept my distance so that when it finally sprung it would catch him and not you. Outside, over the roar of the sea, a sound that did not belong to the storm. Tires on wet gravel, more than one car. Ren went very still, and the stillness this time was different. Coiled, lethal. He crossed to the window, looked once, and when he turned back, the deep water in his eyes had frozen solid. He followed us, he said. Or he guessed. It does not matter now. He took her face in both his hands, the first time he had ever touched her, and his hands were steadier than the whole world. Listen to me. There is a cellar door behind the wall of tapes. It comes out below the cliff path. You go and you do not stop, and you do not come back up for me. Do you understand? You are not staying here to die for me, she said. I did not come home to watch that. Headlights swept the room. A voice on a bullhorn warped by wind called her name and told her to come out. It could still be made right. And even through the distortion, she knew the warmth of it, the father's smile riding on top of the lie. Mai looked at the wall of her own recorded voice. Years of it, boxed and labeled, a dead language no one else on earth could read, and something cold and clear and finally unafraid opened up inside her. He wants me on tape, she said slowly. He has spent 3 years making evidence in a language he cannot understand, and betting no one else could either. She looked up at Ren. But there are 2 people alive who speak it, and one of us is about to make him a recording. She did not run for the cellar. She keyed the small recorder she still carried, the wire that had ridden under her heart since her first night in the casino, the one her handlers had given her to spy on Ren. And she walked out the front door of her grandmother's coast, into the rain and the headlights, with her hands open and empty. Marcus, she called and let her voice carry. You came a long way to close a grave. Halloran stood between the cars, with 4 Kuroda gunmen fanned around him, and that terrible, gentle smile on his face, rain running off all of them. Mai, he said, warm as ever, you have made such a mess. Come here, let me help you fix it. Tell me first, she said, walking closer, keeping him talking, keeping the little recorder, drinking it all in. The warehouse, 3 of our own. Did you know their names, or did you just sell the timing and let the Kuroda do the counting? And Halloran, who had spent 3 years certain that his cleverest crime was that he had never once said the truth out loud, where anyone who mattered could understand it, looked at a disgraced contractor he was minutes from killing, and let the mask slip because he believed there was no one left to hear. I knew all their names, he said softly. I always know the names. That is the job, Mai. You decide who is worth more sold than kept. You were worth more sold. His hand moved toward his coat. You still are. He never finished reaching. Ren came out of the dark of the doorway the way the tide comes over a low wall, fast and total, and without any sound at all. and the night broke apart in a muzzle flash and the flat cracks of gunfire, and Mai's own scream tearing out of her. A Kuroda man swung a weapon toward her, and Ren was already there between the barrel and her body, and he took her down to the wet gravel, and covered her with everything he was as the world came apart above them. She felt the impact go through him. She felt him flinch and hold. When the shooting stuttered and stopped, when his own men who had been trailing them the whole time at a careful distance, because he never truly went anywhere alone, poured out of the tree line and finished it, Mai crawled out from under him, and her hands came away red. He had been shot twice. He was smiling, which frightened her more than the blood. "Recording," he managed, in the tied speech blood on his teeth. "Did you get it?" "I got all of it," she said, weeping, pressing both hands to the wound in his side. "Every word. You are not allowed to die having heard me cry. Do you understand me? That is not how this ends." "Bossy," he breathed. "You always were. I heard it on the tapes. He did not die." It is a strange thing to bring the most dangerous man in Tokyo back from the edge of the sea in a fishing village that map makers gave up on. But the old women were not all gone, and old women who remember the tide speech also remember how to keep a bleeding man breathing until the morning. He lived, and by the time he could stand again, the recording had done what all his careful power could not. Because there really were only two people alive who spoke the language of Shiokawa, and both of them were on Mei's side now. She transcribed Halloran's confession herself, her words in one column and their meaning in the other, in the same patient hand she had seen annotated across Ren's wall. And she handed the review board the one thing a mole who hides inside a dead language can never survive: a translator who is finally telling the whole truth. Halloran had built his life on the certainty that no one could ever audit her. He had never once imagined that the woman he chose because she was invisible might in the end be the only witness the law would believe. They took him in the gray hour before a different morning, and this time the silver-haired smile did not reach anyone at all. Mai got her name back. Not a badge in the end. She did not want the badge anymore. She wanted the shore. She stood on the windswept hill above Shiokawa in the clean, cold light among the scattered graves and the salt wind, at the exact spot where a solemn girl had once been photographed with a boy 3 steps behind her, watching her instead of the camera. He stood beside her, now older, scarred, still moving a little carefully on the side where the bullets had gone in, and for a long while neither of them said anything, because between them, silence had always said the most. "You spent years hearing everything I threw away," she finally said in the old tongue, the tide speech her grandmother's tongue, the language that had made her invisible, and then at the last made her seen. "It does not seem fair that I never got to choose what I told you." "Then choose now," Ren said. "I will only ever hear what you decide to say." She turned to him. The sea moved below them the way it had moved for 1,000 years, and would move for 1,000 more, indifferent to everyone it had ever drowned or carried home. She thought of every whisper she had ever aimed at a mirror, believing no one alive could understand, and she leaned up, and she put her mouth close to the ear of the one man on the earth who had always understood every word, and for the first time in her whole invisible life, she whispered something not to no one, but to him on purpose, wanting him to hear all of it. Whatever she said, the wind took the sound of it and gave it to the graves and kept it there, in a language that would not die after all, because two people had come home to speak it to each other. He closed his eyes. He pulled her in against the scar and the heartbeat beneath it, and he held her, the way the shore holds the tide, when it finally, after all its leaving, comes back to stay. And nobody ever knew what she said, but he heard every word.